The chapel at Wexbourne Hall smelled of old stone and beeswax, and Cassandra Marlowe could not stop her hands from shaking. She gripped the small bouquet of winter jasmine her sister had pressed into her palms an hour ago, and she stared at the altar through the thin gauze of her veil. Her wedding gown was ivory silk, too heavy at the shoulders, too tight at the waist. Her mother's pearls bit cold against her throat. Behind her, her father sat with his hands folded over his cane and his eyes fixed on the floor. The man at the altar did not turn around. He stood with his back to her, tall and very still, one hand resting on the carved railing of the choir stall. The black wool of his coat hung loose across his shoulders, as though he had lost weight recently and not bothered to have it taken in. His hair was the color of iron filings, threaded heavily with gray at the temples, and even from 20 paces, Cassandra could see the slight favoring of his right leg. Adrian Quill, the 7th Duke of Wexbourne. 40 years old, a widower, a war veteran. A man the village called the Old Duke, though no one in Larkspur Cross could remember exactly when the name had attached itself to him. The man her father had sold her to in exchange for the cancellation of a debt and a quiet promise that her younger sister Beatrix would never have to take her place. The rector cleared his throat. The organ wheezed into something approximating a processional. Cassandra walked. Each step felt as though she walked in someone else's body. The pews held perhaps 20 witnesses, mostly the Duke's tenants, and a scattering of relations who had come for the spectacle of seeing the Duke of Wexbourne wed a girl half his age. None of them smiled at her. One woman, sharp-faced, with a feather in her hat the color of dried blood, watched Cassandra pass with an expression that bordered on hunger. Cassandra reached the altar. The Duke turned. She had been told to expect a frail man. She had been told, in the careful private words her aunt used over breakfast, that the Duke was of declining health and unlikely to trouble her in the customary ways. She had built her courage on the back of those phrases. She had told herself she could endure a season of marriage to a fading man if it meant Beatrix would be safe. The man who turned to face her was not fading. He was not handsome in the way her father's friends were handsome. His face was lean and weathered, lines etched deep around the eyes, a thin pale scar running from the corner of his mouth down through the line of his jaw. His eyes were a strange color, gray and faintly green, the color of seawater in winter, and they did not flinch from her. They studied her, briefly and completely, the way a man studies a horse he has just bought, or a book he has been waiting to read for a very long time. Then he looked away, and Cassandra was not entirely sure what had just happened to her. The ceremony took less than a quarter of an hour. The vows were spoken. Cassandra heard her own voice answering as though it belonged to someone else. The Duke's voice was low and surprisingly steady, with a faint rasp in it, as though he did not use it often. When the rector pronounced them married, the Duke did not kiss her. He took her hand instead, lifted it formally, and pressed his lips briefly to the back of her glove. The kiss did not warm her. It barely touched her. And yet she felt it, sharp and specific, as though he had pressed a coin into her palm that she would have to spend later, alone. They walked down the aisle together. He matched his pace to hers, and she realized with a small, startled awareness that he was hiding the limp deliberately. He did not want to be seen halting on his wedding day. Outside the chapel, in the gray November light, her father did not embrace her. He took her hands, looked at her once with an expression she could not read, and said, "Be well, Cassandra. Be well." Then he climbed into his carriage and drove away. Beatrix had not been allowed to come. Cassandra had insisted on that. There were some things a 15-year-old sister did not need to witness. The Duke's carriage was black and unornamented. He helped her in himself, then climbed in opposite her, settling into the seat with a brief tightening around his eyes that told her the cold was hurting his leg. He pulled a wool blanket from the seat beside him and offered it to her, without looking at her. Cassandra took it. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Adrian," he said, "if you can manage it. Your Grace is a long phrase to live with." His voice was quieter than she had expected. She looked at her gloved hands in her lap. "I will try," she said. "That is all I have ever asked of anyone." The carriage moved off. Wexbourne Hall lay only 2 miles from the chapel, but the road wound through bare oak woods and across a stone bridge over a river already beginning to ice at the edges, and Cassandra had time to think and time to look at her husband and time to be afraid of both. He did not look at her once during the drive. He looked out the window. The gray at his temples was not the gray of decay, she realized slowly. It was the gray of a man who had been bled by something. Grief, perhaps. The war. The first wife the village still whispered about. The Duchess Helene, who had drowned in the river they had just crossed, 5 winters ago, in circumstances no one was permitted to discuss above a whisper. Cassandra had been told the Duke was harmless. Looking at him now, she thought harmless was not the right word. The man across from her had survived more than he should have, and he wore that survival like a badly fitted coat. "Your father," the Duke said, and Cassandra startled. "Yes, he paid you the courtesy of attending. That cost him something. I want you to remember that in the months ahead when you are angry with him." She did not know how to answer. She had been preparing herself to be angry with her father for the rest of her life. The Duke had handed her a different option, very gently, and then turned back to the window as though he had not done it. Wexbourne Hall came into view through the trees. It was larger than she had imagined, and older. A long gray house of 3 stories, with ivy climbing the western wing, and a row of cypress trees standing watch along the drive. Lights had been lit in the lower windows. The November sky had already begun to go the color of pewter. A line of servants stood waiting on the steps. The Duke helped Cassandra down. He introduced her to the housekeeper, a tall, thin woman named Mrs. Penhallow, and to the butler, a man called Greaves, and to perhaps a dozen others, whose names Cassandra knew she would not remember. They curtsied and bowed. None of them smiled. One young footman, fair-haired and very good-looking, held her gaze a fraction longer than was proper. Inside, the great hall was warm and smelled of cedar and old paper. A fire burned in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The Duke turned to her at the foot of the staircase. "You will want to rest," he said. "Mrs. Penhallow will show you to your rooms. Supper is at 8, but you need not come down if you are tired. Tomorrow we will discuss the household, and you will tell me what changes you wish to make." She blinked at him. "Changes? You are the Duchess now. The house is yours to run as you see fit." He paused, and one corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I have been a poor housekeeper for a long time. I will be grateful for the improvement." She could not think of anything to say. He inclined his head and turned away, and she watched him walk slowly across the great hall, the limp now visible because he was not bothering to hide it, and she watched him disappear through a door she would later learn led to his library. "This way, Your Grace," said Mrs. Penhallow. Cassandra followed her up the long staircase. Her rooms were in the east wing, a suite of 3 connected chambers, the bedroom at the center, dressed in pale blue silk, with a writing table by the window that overlooked a walled garden gone brown with the season. A maid named Tilly was unpacking the trunks quietly. Cassandra walked to the window. The garden below had a fountain in it, dry now, and a stone bench, and a single late rose blooming against all good sense on a wall by the south corner. She pressed her forehead briefly to the cold glass. She was a duchess. She had been one for less than an hour. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Penhallow from the doorway. "His Grace asked me to give you this. He said you were not to open it until you were alone." Cassandra turned. The housekeeper held a small object wrapped in dark green silk, tied with a length of plain twine. It was perhaps the size of a book, but heavier than a book. He said it was a wedding gift. He said you were to keep it private. Cassandra crossed the room and took the parcel. Beneath the silk, her fingers met the unmistakable shape of a small wooden box, and something else, smaller, harder, a piece of metal lying loose against the wood. A key. Mrs. Penhallow withdrew without further comment. Tilly slipped quietly out behind her and closed the door. Cassandra stood alone in the blue silk bedroom of a house she did not yet know, in a marriage she had not chosen, with her husband's wedding gift trembling in her hands. Outside the window, the November light was failing, and a single rook called once from the cypress trees. She set the parcel on the writing table, untied the twine with fingers that were no longer steady, and lifted the green silk away. Beneath it lay a small writing desk, no larger than a folded shawl. The wood was rosewood, polished to a deep red brown, and across the lid, in delicate inlaid letters of pale ivory, was a single name. It was not her married name. It was her own. Cassandra Marlowe, the inlay read, in a careful, elegant hand, as though it had been made for her, and made for her some time ago, before he had ever known whether she would say yes. The key lay across the lid, gleaming. Somewhere in the house below her, very faintly, she heard a door close. She did not open it. Her hand went twice toward the key, and twice she drew it back. Whatever lay inside the small rosewood desk was not the sort of thing a bride ought to discover on her wedding evening, with no one to witness her face. She covered the desk again with the green silk, set it carefully behind her hairbrush, and she rang for Tilly to help her dress for supper. She had decided, looking at her own name in ivory, that she could not afford to hide. Tilly dressed her in a simple gown of deep green wool with a high collar. Her hair was put up in a smooth coil at the nape of her neck. She wore no jewelry except her mother's pearls and the thin gold band on the third finger of her left hand, which the Duke had placed there an hour and a half ago. She went down at 5 minutes before 8. The dining room was long and low-ceilinged and lit by a single branched candelabra. The table was set for 2 at one end, with her place laid at his right hand, rather than the conventional opposite end. Adrian was already there. He rose when she entered, without leaning on the chair, though she saw the cost of it pass briefly across his face. "You came down," he said. "I said I would try." "Yes, you did." He pulled out her chair himself, before the footman could reach it. The footman, the same fair-haired young man from the steps, poured her wine and stepped back to the wall. "Halloran," said the Duke without turning his head, "you may go. We will serve ourselves tonight." The footman bowed and withdrew. The door closed with a small, precise click, and they were alone with a roasted fowl, a tureen of soup, 3 kinds of bread, and the silence of a house that had not seen a duchess at its table in 5 years. Cassandra unfolded her napkin. "You are not what I expected, Your Grace." He looked up. The candlelight caught his eyes, and the green in them was more visible at this distance, a strange clear color, almost transparent. "Adrian," he said. "Adrian, I was told by my aunt that you were of declining health. Was she warning you or comforting you?" "Comforting, I think." "Then I'm sorry to disappoint." He spooned soup into her bowl and then his own. "I have a bad leg. I have nightmares. I am older than the man your father owed money to expected. None of those are a declining health, exactly. They are merely the shape of me." She had been prepared for evasion. She had not been prepared for a husband who, on the first night of their marriage, told her plainly the shape of him. "I do not know what I expected," she said. "Few people do, on a first evening." They ate. After a while, he set down his spoon and folded his hands at the edge of the table. "I want to say one thing to you," he said, "and then we will not speak of it again unless you wish to." She set down her spoon as well. Yes, I know what you were told about this marriage. I want you to understand that I did not seek your hand for the reasons your family understood me to seek it. I have my own reasons. I will not press them on you, and I will not ask anything of you that you do not freely offer. He paused. The candle guttered, then steadied. You are not required to be my wife in any sense beyond the legal. The household, the estate, your time, your friendships, your private rooms, all of these are yours. You will have a separate suite. You will have keys to every door in this house but one. You will have an allowance you may spend without consulting me. If you wish, in a year, to live elsewhere, I will arrange a house for you. She stared at him. That is not, she said, and stopped, and found she did not know how to finish the sentence. Not what? Not what marriages are? Not what most marriages are? His mouth moved. I am aware. I have lived alone a long time, and I have had a long time to think about what I would do if I were ever permitted a second chance to do this differently. The one door, she said carefully. The one door I will not have a key to. My library after midnight. A pause. I do not sleep well. I work at night. I do not wish to be observed. Cassandra felt a small relaxation in her chest she had not known she was carrying. And the gift, she said before she could stop herself. He looked up sharply. It was the first time she had seen him caught. You opened it. No, I did not. I did not know if I was meant to. I am asking you now. He was silent for a long moment. The candle threw shadows along the line of the scar at his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was different. Lower, raw at the edges. It is a writing desk, he said. It was made for you. It contains things that belong to you, and have belonged to you for some time, although you did not know it. The key is yours. I will not ask you when you open it. I will not ask you what you find. It is yours, Cassandra. It has always been yours. I have only kept it for you until you were ready to receive it. She could not speak. He looked down at his plate and did not press her. I have, he said after a moment, kept it badly. I should have given it to you years ago. I did not have the right. Tonight I am giving it to you because tonight, by law, I have the right to give you whatever I please, and I am going to use that right exactly once, and then I am going to leave you alone, unless you ask otherwise. Cassandra found that her hands had begun to tremble again. She set them in her lap. I do not understand you, she said quietly. No, I would not expect you to. Not yet. Are you, and her voice caught, are you a kind man, Your Grace? Adrian. Adrian. Are you a kind man? He looked up. The seawater eyes in the candlelight were not unreadable any longer. They were simply tired. I have tried to be, he said. I have not always succeeded. Tonight I am trying. She did not finish her supper. She rose, and he rose with her, and he walked her, slowly, his limp visible now, to the foot of the staircase. He did not touch her. Good night, Cassandra. Good night, Adrian. She climbed the stairs. She walked along the corridor to her rooms and closed the door behind her. Then she crossed the bedroom in the dark, lit a single candle on the dressing table, and pulled the green silk parcel from behind her hairbrush. She fitted the key into the small brass lock on the lid of the rosewood desk. It turned with a soft, easy click, the way a lock turns when it has been recently oiled. She lifted the lid. The desk was full of letters, bundle upon bundle of them, tied in plain ribbon, each bundle labeled in the same elegant hand that had inlaid her name on the lid. The labels were dates. The earliest was 7 years ago. Cassandra picked up the topmost letter. It was sealed with a circle of plain wax, bearing a single pressed sprig of jasmine, the same flower her sister had pressed into her hands that morning. She turned the letter over. It was addressed to Miss Cassandra Marlowe. The first letter Adrian Quill had ever written to her was dated the 3rd of March, 7 years ago, when she had been 17 years old, and she had not yet met him, and she had not even known his name. Her hand shook so badly she could not break the seal. She set the letter down. She stared at it. She covered her mouth with her hand. Somewhere in the dark house below her, a clock struck 11, slow and deep, and Cassandra Marlowe, who had that morning been a girl sold to settle a debt, sat in a candlelit room and stared at a stack of letters a man had been writing to her for 7 years without ever having sent one. A floorboard creaked outside her door. She froze. The footstep was uneven. One foot, then a slight drag, then the other. It wasn't a servant's step. It paused, just outside her door, for the length of 3 slow breaths, and then it moved on, slow and careful, down the corridor toward the west wing of the house, where the Duke kept his rooms, and where, very faintly, a door at last opened and closed. Cassandra sat in the candlelight with her husband's unsent letters spread before her, and she understood, all at once, and far too late, that she had married a man she did not know at all, and she was not, as she had believed, the one in this marriage with the most to fear. She did not sleep. She sat at the writing table until the candle burned down to a stub, and the November moon cleared the chimney pots and laid a thin blue light across the rosewood desk and her own pale hands. She did not break the seal on the topmost letter. Every time her fingers approached it, something in her chest folded and would not let her. 7 years. She had been 17. She had been at Marlowe House in Wiltshire, helping her mother with the spring linen, learning to ride side saddle on the bay mare her father had given her for her birthday. She had not known the Duke of Wexbourne. She had been a girl with ink on her cuffs and an unfinished sampler in her work-basket, and somewhere in the world, a man she had never met had sat down at a desk and written her a letter and not sent it. Why? The word went around and around in her head until it lost its shape. Why would a man write letters to a stranger? Why would he keep them? Why would he wait 7 years and a marriage to put them in her hand? Toward 2 in the morning, she lit a fresh candle. She set the topmost letter aside and chose another from the middle of the bundle, dated some 14 months later, because she did not feel ready to begin at the beginning. The seal was the same. Plain wax. Pressed jasmine. She broke it. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same elegant hand that had since put her name in ivory on the lid of a desk. The ink was faded only slightly. It had been written by a younger man than the man downstairs, but not by a young man. The handwriting carried the quietness of someone who had already lost things. Miss Marlowe, I saw you today at the Cairo Assembly, although you did not see me. You danced with a young man whose name I am told is Linfield, and you laughed at something he said in the 3rd figure. And I want to record here that the laugh was the first sound of pleasure I have heard in 7 months. I do not say this to flatter you. I write these letters because I do not know where else to put what I have begun to feel, and because I will not put it on you until I have grown into a man worthy of carrying it without crushing what I am carrying. I lost my wife a year ago this April. The world is large, and I am only a man you have not met. But I want you to know that on the day I saw you laugh, I went home to my empty house, and I did not, for the first time in a year, sit by the fire in the dark. I will not send this letter. I have no right to send it. You are 17 years old, and I am 34, and a widower with a damaged leg and a great deal of grief, and you have done nothing to invite this attention from me. You will likely marry a man named Linfield, or someone like him, and I will be glad for you when I read of it in the papers, although I will not be glad exactly. I will be something else. But I cannot stop watching you. when you appear in the rooms I happen to be in, and I cannot stop noticing the things about you that no one else troubles to notice. I notice that you are kind to the older women, whom no one else asks to dance. I notice that your sister Beatrix follows you about like a small, fierce shadow, and that you treat her with the seriousness most people reserve for adults. I notice that you laugh more than is fashionable, and I find I do not care that it is unfashionable. I am writing this letter to no one. I am writing it to you. I do not know how to reconcile those two statements, and so I will stop trying. Yours, in a way you will never know. A. Cassandra set the letter down. She found that her face was wet. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her wrist and folded the letter back along its old creases and sat with her hands flat on the rosewood desk. The Cairo Assembly. She remembered it. She had been 17. She had worn a dress of pale yellow muslin with a sash her mother had embroidered. She had danced with George Linfield and laughed at a joke about a horse he had once fallen off of. Linfield had married a woman named Anne the following year and gone to live in Yorkshire, and Cassandra had not thought of him in 5 years. She had not seen Adrian Quill at the Cairo Assembly. She would have remembered the limp. She would have remembered the eyes, unless he had not danced, unless he had stood at the edge of the room, unless he had been the kind of man who watched and wasn't watched, because his wife had been dead a year and his leg would not let him dance. She put her face in her hands. It is one thing to be married to a stranger. It is another to be married to a man who has been looking at you for 7 years, and who has never, in all that time, made you the burden of his looking. I should be afraid, she thought. I am not. That is the strange thing. She rose from the desk on legs that had gone numb from sitting and walked to the window. The walled garden below was silver with frost. The single late rose was a dark stain against the south wall. Somewhere in the west wing, a light was burning. He was awake in his library, doing whatever it was he did at night that he did not wish to be observed doing. There was a knock at her door. Cassandra startled so violently she nearly dropped the letter. She thrust it back into the desk and closed the lid and turned the key with hands that had gone clumsy. Yes, she called. Who is it? Mrs. Penhallow, Your Grace. Forgive the hour. There is a matter. Cassandra opened the door. The housekeeper stood in the corridor in a wrapper of gray wool, a single candle in her hand, her gray hair in a long plait down her back. Her face was tight in a way Cassandra had not yet seen. Behind her, very faintly, Cassandra could hear voices from the lower floor. A man's voice, raised, not the Duke's. Your Grace, said Mrs. Penhallow, and she chose her words with the care of a woman walking on ice. His Grace's nephew has arrived. His nephew? Mr. Sebastian Quill, Your Grace. The heir presumptive. He has ridden through the night from London. He has been drinking. He is downstairs in the great hall, and he is asking very loudly to be presented to you. Cassandra felt the cold of the corridor flood into the room. Where is the Duke? She said. His Grace is with him. His Grace is endeavoring to persuade Mr. Quill that the hour is unsuitable. Mr. Quill is not being persuaded. From below, very faintly, a man laughed. It was a young laugh, bright and unstable, and even at this distance, Cassandra could hear in it the particular cruelty that lives in men who have ridden a long way to do something they should not do. Your Grace, said Mrs. Penhallow very softly, I would not, ordinarily, ask this of you on your wedding night, but His Grace's leg is paining him tonight. He's standing too long. And Mr. Quill, she stopped. She did not finish. Cassandra drew a long breath. I will come down, she said. Give me 1 minute. She closed the door. She crossed to the dressing table. She pinched color into her cheeks. She straightened the line of her gown. She looked at herself in the small oval glass, and she found that she wasn't, after all, afraid. She had been a wife for 9 hours. She had read in those hours a single letter from a man who had been carrying her name like a stone in his pocket for 7 years. He was downstairs with a bad leg and a drunk nephew, and he had given her a key and a desk and asked nothing. I do not yet know what kind of wife I am going to be, she thought. But I know what kind I am not going to be tonight. She opened the door. Mrs. Penhallow was waiting. "Lead the way, please," said Cassandra Quill, the 7th Duchess of Wexbourne, and she followed the candle down the long, dark corridor toward the staircase and toward the man laughing in the great hall. The great hall at Wexbourne smelled of wood smoke and wet wool when Cassandra came down the staircase, and the man standing in the middle of it turned at the sound of her slippers on the stone. Sebastian Quill was beautiful. He was perhaps 27, tall, fair-haired, with the long, elegant bones of a man who had been told all his life that he was handsome. He wore riding clothes that had once been very good and were now spattered with mud to the knee. His boots dripped onto the flagstones. A glass of the Duke's brandy hung loose between 2 fingers of his right hand, and his left hand rested with a deliberate familiarity on the back of one of the great hall chairs, as though he had touched it many times before. Adrian stood near the hearth. He was not leaning on anything. His weight had shifted entirely onto his good leg. His right hand was braced lightly against the stone of the chimney-piece, and there was a particular pallor along his jaw that Mrs. Penhallow, beside her on the stairs, drew a small breath at the sight of. Sebastian saw Cassandra, and his whole face changed. "Ah," he said. "Forgive me, my dear aunt. I had been told you were lovely. I had not been told you were this." He set his glass down, not gently, and came forward with both hands held out toward her. Cassandra did not move. She remained on the 3rd step from the bottom of the staircase, which kept her face level with his, and she folded her hands in front of her at the waist, and she said nothing. Sebastian stopped 2 paces from the bottom of the stairs. He smiled. The smile was bright and wide, and showed very good teeth, and Cassandra understood what kind of man had ridden through the November night to introduce himself. "Sebastian," said Adrian quietly from the hearth. "Uncle." Sebastian did not turn. His eyes were on Cassandra. "I was only going to welcome the Duchess to the family. Surely a kiss on the hand is not too much. We are kin now, after all." "It is the middle of the night," said Adrian. "She is not receiving. She is standing at the foot of the staircase in a perfectly proper gown, Uncle." Cassandra felt her own pulse in her throat. She did not know this house. She did not know its servants. She did not know whether the man on the hearth was a man she could trust, or only a man she had begun to want to trust, which was not the same thing at all. She knew one thing. The man at the foot of her staircase had not come to welcome her. He had come to take her measure. She came down the last 3 steps slowly and stopped on the flagstones, a careful arm's length from Sebastian Quill, and she did not extend her hand to him. "Mr. Quill," she said. "Aunt," he said, and the word was a small private joke, and she heard it. "I am not your aunt, Mr. Quill. I am your uncle's wife. There is a difference, and I think you are old enough to know it." A small silence. Sebastian's smile did not falter, but something behind his eyes did. He had expected a frightened girl. He was now adjusting, very rapidly, to a different room than the one he had walked into. "Forgive me," he said. "Of course. Your Grace, then? I am properly chastened. You are properly drunk, Mr. Quill." It came out before she had decided to say it. She heard Mrs. Penhallow draw a sharp breath behind her. From the hearth, Adrian made a small sound she could not interpret. Sebastian laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had been struck by something he had not seen coming and had decided, very quickly, to enjoy the bruise. "I am," he said. "I have ridden 40 miles in the rain on news of my uncle's wedding, and I confess I stopped for what is generally called fortification at 3 separate inns along the way. I apologize for the hour. I do not apologize for coming. Why did you come? Said Cassandra. To meet you. At midnight. At the earliest hour I could manage. Sebastian, said Adrian. And now he had moved. He had come away from the hearth, slowly, and Cassandra heard the irregular weight of his step on the stones. She saw the small flicker that crossed Sebastian's face. Not concern. The opposite of concern. A small, private pleasure that his uncle was hurting. Greaves will show you to the blue room. We will speak in the morning. I had hoped to dine, uncle. You have dined. At the inns. I had hoped, then, to sit by the fire with my new aunt. You will sit by no fires tonight, Sebastian. The blue room. Greaves. The butler stepped forward from the shadows by the door. He had been there the whole time, Cassandra realized. There were probably 3 other servants she had not seen, watching from doorways, ready. Sebastian did not move. He looked at his uncle. He looked at Cassandra. He looked back at his uncle, and the smile he wore now was different, smaller, more private. As you wish, he said. Aunt. He bowed to Cassandra, and the bow was lower than it needed to be, and longer than it needed to be. I look forward to a long acquaintance. He followed Greaves toward the west corridor. His step was steady. He had not been as drunk, Cassandra realized, as he had wished to appear. The door at the end of the corridor opened and closed. Adrian stood very still in the middle of the great hall. Cassandra crossed to him without thinking and put her hand under his elbow, and she felt him flinch, and then steady, and then accept the help. The chair, she said. I am perfectly. The chair, Adrian. He let her bring him to the high-backed chair by the hearth. He sat down with the careful slowness of a man who had been standing in a position that hurt for too long. Mrs. Penhallow came forward with a cushion for his leg without being asked. I am sorry, he said quietly, looking at the fire. I had not intended for you to meet him at all this season. He is your heir. He is the son of my dead brother. He is my heir only because I have produced none of my own. He is also a young man who has spent the last 5 years calculating very precisely what he stands to lose, if I am ever foolish enough to remarry. Cassandra knelt beside the chair. She had not planned to, but the hearth was warm, and his face was gray, and she could not stand and look down at him in this moment. Adrian. Yes. Did you marry me to disinherit him? A long pause. No, he said. I married you to give you the desk. The disinheritance is, perhaps, a useful side effect, but it is not the reason. He will hate me, she said. Yes. He will try to hurt me. He will try, yes. He will not succeed. How can you promise that? Adrian opened his eyes and looked at her. The seawater eyes in the firelight were not tired now. They were something steady and old and very awake. Because I have spent 5 years preparing this house for the possibility that he would try, he said. I did not know it would be you. I knew it would be someone. I have been ready a long time, Cassandra. She was kneeling beside her husband's chair on the cold stone of the great hall in the middle of the night of her wedding day, and she found that she had taken his hand, and he did not pull it away. Go to bed, he said softly. Mrs. Penhallow will see you up. Lock your door tonight. Tomorrow we will breakfast, and I will tell you what I should have told you before the chapel. She rose. She let go of his hand because Mrs. Penhallow was waiting, and because, if she had not let go of it, she would have begun to cry. She crossed to the staircase. At the foot of the stairs, she turned back. Adrian. Yes. Thank you for sending him to the blue room. He almost smiled. It was the closest she had seen him come to it. Thank you for coming down, he said. Mrs. Penhallow has a long memory. She will not forget what you did tonight. Cassandra climbed the staircase. At the top, she paused, looking down. Adrian had not risen from the chair. He was looking into the fire, and his hand was pressed against his thigh in a way that told her, even from this distance, that the leg was hurting him very badly, and that he had hidden it from her until she was no longer in the room. She went to her bedroom. She locked the door. She did not, however, go to bed. She lit the candle, turned the small brass key, chose a second letter from the bundle dated 3 winters ago, and sat down to read. Outside her window, a single figure crossed the gravel of the drive, very quietly from the west wing, and stood for some time looking up at her lit window before turning back into the house. The figure did not limp. She woke late, with the second letter still folded against her hand, and the candle long since burned out. The second letter had been short. It had been written, Adrian's careful date told her, on a January night 3 years before, after he had seen her at a Christmas service at the cathedral in Salisbury. He had sat in a pew across the nave and watched her sing. Tonight you sang the Magnificat. You sing as though you mean every word of it. Most people do not. You sang the words as though Mary were a girl you knew, and as though you had decided, on her behalf, that the proud would in fact be scattered, and the meek would in fact be lifted up. I came home and I sat by my fire, and I thought, the world is not over for me. There is a girl in Wiltshire who sings as though the world is not over. I do not know what I am to do with this. I will not send it. She rose, rang for Tilly, and dressed in a morning gown of dove-gray wool. She pinned her hair in a simple knot and went down to breakfast. The breakfast room was a small, bright chamber on the south side of the house, with windows that looked over the walled garden. The table was set for 2. Adrian was not yet there. Sebastian was. He rose when she entered, and the smile he wore by daylight was smaller, more controlled. He was clean-shaven. He was dressed in fresh clothes of dark green, very correct. "Aunt," he said. He corrected himself. "Your Grace, I beg you to forgive my intrusion last night. I was not myself." "Good morning, Mr. Quill." She crossed to her place at the table. She did not let him pull out her chair. The footman, Halloran, did it, and Cassandra noted that Halloran was watching Sebastian with the careful blank attention of a servant who had been instructed to do exactly that. "Will the Duke join us?" she said. "My uncle takes his breakfast in the library, ordinarily. He does not enjoy company before noon. I imagine, however, that this morning will be different. He is, after all, newly married." "Your Grace," Sebastian said after a careful moment, "I owe you a more thorough apology than the one I attempted last night." "Do you, Mr. Quill? I rode here with a great deal of resentment in my head. I had heard of my uncle's marriage, and I believed, in my resentment, that it was an act of cruelty toward me. I rode 40 miles in the rain to demonstrate my resentment, and I did so badly, and I am ashamed." She turned her teacup in its saucer. "You believed that your uncle's marriage to me was an act of cruelty toward you. I am the heir presumptive to a dukedom, Your Grace. I have arranged my life around that expectation. I had not anticipated that my uncle would marry a young woman more than a decade his junior, who is, forgive me, of a family with no title and considerable debt." She set the teacup down. "Are you asking me, Mr. Quill, why I married your uncle?" "I am asking," and now his voice softened, became almost confidential. "I am asking whether you understand what you have walked into. My uncle is not the man he appears to be. I do not say this to wound you. I say it because you do not have anyone in this house who is on your side." She had spent the previous night reading 2 letters from a man who had been writing to her for 7 years without sending them. The man across the breakfast table was speaking to do a great deal to her. "Mr. Quill," she said, "you have been in this house for less than 10 hours. I have been in it for less than 20. I do not believe either of us is qualified, this morning, to tell the other what kind of man my husband is." A small silence. Sebastian smiled. It was a smile that acknowledged a hit. "You are interesting." He buttered a piece of toast with great precision. I had prepared for frightened. "I am revising my plans. Revise them in your own room, Mr. Quill. I prefer to take my breakfast in silence when I can manage it." He laughed. It was a real laugh, brief and surprised, and Cassandra heard in it that he was a man who could be charming when he was struck. That was the dangerous kind. The door opened. Adrian came in. He was dressed plainly, in dark wool. He moved more easily this morning than he had the night before. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Sebastian at the table. "You are up early, Sebastian." "I could not sleep, Uncle." "Excitement, I am told, has that effect on the young. You will not be here long enough for it to trouble you." A small pause. "I had hoped," said Sebastian, "to stay through the week, to attend the tenants' supper on Saturday. You did not attend last year. Last year, I was in Italy. You were in London. You were at Madeira's. I had a letter." The faintest color came into Sebastian's cheek. Adrian crossed to the table. He took the chair opposite Cassandra, which placed him at Sebastian's left elbow, and he took his tea black, and he looked at his nephew across the rim of the cup. "You may stay until Friday," he said. "Friday morning, you will leave. Greaves will have a horse ready. You will not return to Wexbourne until I send for you. Are we clear?" "Quite clear, Uncle." "Good. Then you may go and write to your mother." Sebastian rose. He bowed to Cassandra with perfect propriety. "Your Grace, Mr. Quill." He left. The door closed. Adrian looked at Cassandra over his teacup. "How long," he said quietly, "did it take him to begin telling you what kind of man your husband is?" "About 6 minutes, Adrian." He set the teacup down. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, a brief, startled sound, surprisingly young, and the change went through her chest like a small, bright knife. 6 minutes, he said. "He is becoming inefficient. He used to manage it in 3. He has done it before. To the housekeeper, to the steward, to my groom. He has a theme. The theme is that I am not what I appear to be." She studied him over her cup. "Who are you, then, Adrian? If you are not what you appear to be." "I am a man who has been writing letters to you for 7 years, he said. "That is, by any reasonable measure, who I am. The rest is detail." She felt her face warm. "You read them," he said. 2 of them." "Which 2? The Cairo Assembly, and the Magnificat at Salisbury." He was very still. Then he set down his cup and folded his hands at the edge of the table. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For the Cairo letter. I should not have written it. You were 17. You also did not send it. That is the only thing I did right. You were grieving, Adrian. The letter does not say anything I would not be willing to have said to me at 17 by a kind man, even a sad one." He looked up. "You are not angry?" "I have not decided yet what I am, Adrian. I have read 2 letters out of 7 years. I am reserving judgment. But I am not angry this morning." He drew a long breath. "That," he said, "is more than I had any right to ask for." She set her cup down. "Tell me about Helene," she said. The name landed in the bright breakfast room like a stone dropped into still water. She watched the ripple of it pass across his face. "Now," he said. "Yes. Now. Before I read any more letters, I want to hear it from you, not from Sebastian, not from village gossip. I want to hear it from you while we are alone, and I have not yet decided what kind of wife I am going to be." He looked at her for a long time, and at last, he nodded once, slowly. "Then close the door, Cassandra, and ring for Greaves to keep my nephew out of the corridor. This will take some time." She rose to close the door. As she did, She saw, through the long window, Sebastian Quill standing on the gravel of the drive, smoking a small cheroot and looking up at the east wing of the house. He was looking at her bedroom window. He did not look away when he saw her see him. He smiled, slowly, raised the cheroot in a small private salute, and walked toward the stables. Cassandra closed the door. Adrian did not begin at once. He rose from the table and walked to the fire, and stood with his hand braced lightly against the chimney-piece, and looked down into the coals. She let him. She had asked the question. She owed him the silence in which to answer it. When at last he spoke, he did not look at her. "I married Helene Ashby when I was 27, he said. She was 24. We had known each other since we were children. There had never been anyone else, for either of us. We were married in the same chapel where you stood yesterday. We were happy." He paused. "I want you to understand that. We were happy, because what came afterward has eaten the memory of that happiness in the village, and I do not wish to tell you a story in which only the ending is true." "I understand," Cassandra said quietly. "We were married 6 years. We had no children. That was a private grief, and a long one, and it began to wear on her in ways I did not know how to ease. I was at war for 2 of those years. Spain, the peninsula. I came back with this leg and a great deal of silence in my head, and I did not give her what she needed when I returned. She was lonely in this house, and I let her be lonely." He turned at last and looked at her. "There was a man," he said. "His name does not matter now. He was a friend of mine. He came to Wexbourne often during the years I was in Spain. By the time I returned, he had become more than a friend to her, and we lived for nearly a year in a house that contained a thing none of us would name." Cassandra did not speak. "In the spring of the year she died, I found a letter she had written, but not sent. It was to him. It was a letter saying that she had decided to be faithful to her marriage, that she was asking him not to write to her anymore." He paused. "I did not confront her with the letter. I thought in my pride that I would let her come to me in her own time. I thought in my pride that if she had decided to be faithful, it was not for me to humiliate her by demanding the apology she had already, in her own way, written. So I did nothing. I waited. I was a fool." He looked into the fire again. "She drowned that May," he said. "She had gone walking by the river at dusk, alone, which she often did. The bank by the bridge had been undermined by the spring floods, although none of us knew it yet. The earth gave way under her. She went into the river. The water was high. By the time the gardener heard her cry out, she had been carried 1/2 mile. They found her at midnight against the weir. Cassandra's hands had gone cold in her lap. There was an inquest. It returned a verdict of misadventure. My wife died in an accident, on a riverbank that should have been mended the previous autumn, and was not, because the man whose duty it was to mend it had been busy with other matters." He stopped. I was the man whose duty it was. She understood, now, why he did not sleep. After her death, the village began to whisper. There had been gossip about the friend for some time, and so some people began to suggest that perhaps Helene had not slipped on the riverbank by accident, that perhaps she had walked into the river, that perhaps I had walked her into it. Both versions circulated. They circulate still. Sebastian finds them useful. He has refreshed them in the parts of London where my reputation might otherwise have begun to recover. He drew a long breath. That is the story of Helene, Cassandra. I did not love her well in the end. I did not protect her from her loneliness. I did not mend the riverbank. I did not, however, kill her. Cassandra rose from her chair. She crossed the room to where he stood at the hearth. She did not touch him. She looked up at him in the morning light. "Why you wrote to me," she said quietly. After her. Why me? He looked at her. Because the first time I saw you, he said, you laughed at the Caro assembly, and the laugh was the first sound I had heard in a year that did not make me feel like a man standing at a graveside. I did not write the letters because I wanted you. I wrote them because, for the length of the time it took to write them, I was not standing at the graveside. The letters were never about you, in the way you might fear they were. They were about a man who had begun to remember that other people existed. I chose you because I had to choose someone, and you were the one whose laugh had done it. He paused. And then I chose you again, the next year, and the year after that. And I don't know when I began to love you. There is only the shape of 7 winters, and at the end of them, your father came to me with a debt he could not pay, and I was given an opportunity I had spent 5 years promising myself I would never take, and I took it. And I am, at this moment, the most ashamed and the most grateful I have ever been in my life. Both at once. She was crying. The tears came down her face quietly, and she did not try to stop them. He did not move toward her. He stood at the hearth with his hand on the chimney-piece, and he let her cry. And she understood that he had set himself a rule about touching her, and he was going to keep it until she changed it. And she found that she wanted to change it. She took a step toward him. He did not move. She took another. She came within reach of his hand, and lifted her hand, and laid it, very gently, against the front of his coat over his heart. Through the wool she could feel that his heart was going very fast. Adrian. Yes, you are not what I expected. I know. I have not decided what I feel about you. I know. But I have decided one thing this morning. I am not going to be a wife who leaves you alone, she said. I do not yet know what kind of wife I am going to be. But I am not going to be a wife who lives in the East Wing and lets you stand alone at a hearth at midnight with a leg that will not hold you. He did not answer. He could not. She saw that there were tears on his face also, and that he was not going to wipe them away in front of her, because he had decided that he would not hide from her any of the parts of himself that hurt. Cassandra, he said, very low. Yes. May I take your hand? Yes. He took her hand. He lifted it. He pressed it to the side of his face, against the line of the scar, and he closed his eyes, and held her hand against his cheek for the length of 3 slow breaths, and then released it and stepped back. You should go to your rooms, he said. There is a tenants' supper this evening in the Great Hall. 3 dozen of the village will be here. They will wish to meet you. You may decline. I will not decline. Cassandra. I will not decline, Adrian. They are my tenants now. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you. She left the breakfast room. She walked along the corridor to the staircase, and she climbed slowly, and at the landing, she paused and pressed her palm against the wall to steady herself. In her room, she found, on the writing table, a single folded note in Mrs. Penhallow's hand. Your Grace, it read. I have taken the liberty of having a gown of dark blue silk pressed for this evening. Mr. Quill believes you will dine privately with the Duke. I did not correct him. Cassandra read it twice. She crossed to the rosewood desk and took out the 3rd letter from the bundle of 7 years ago, and she sat down by the window, and she broke the seal. But before she could read more than the salutation, there was a sound at her window. A small, sharp sound. A pebble. She rose and went to the window and looked down into the walled garden. Sebastian Quill stood on the gravel path beside the dry fountain. He was looking up at her. He held something in his hand, something white, a folded piece of paper, and when he saw that she had come to the window, he raised the paper. Slowly, held it up so that she could see it, then tucked it carefully into the breast of his coat, smiled at her, and walked away across the garden toward the stables. Cassandra stood at the window with the unread letter in her hand, and she understood, with a cold, clear certainty, that her husband's nephew had a letter, and that the letter wasn't one that belonged to him, and that he intended that she should know he had it. She did not tell him about the pebble. She decided that she would not tell Adrian yet. He would limp through the great hall tonight in front of 36 tenants. He would stand for hours. She would not add Sebastian to the weight he was already carrying. She had read the third letter while Tilly worked on her hair. It had been written 6 years ago. I have begun to dream about you. I do not approve of myself. I am ending this letter. A. That was all. She had not opened a fourth. The dark blue silk fitted her well. The bodice was high but not stiff, the sleeves long, the skirt heavy enough to move with a kind of slow gravity when she walked. Cassandra wore her mother's pearls at the throat and the thin gold band on her finger, and nothing else. The tenants of Wexbourne were coming to meet a girl who had been brought home in a black carriage that morning, and who would be expected, by every woman in the room, to either flinch or hold steady. Cassandra had decided that she would hold steady. She came down the staircase at 5 minutes before 8. The great hall had been transformed. Long trestle tables ran the length of it, set with white cloth and pewter. A fire roared in the great hearth. 2 fiddlers and a man with a small drum sat tuning in the corner. The air smelled of roasted mutton and apple cider. The tenants were already there, perhaps 40 of them, standing in small, uncertain knots by the walls. Adrian was at the foot of the staircase. He was in dark blue also. The color of his eyes deepened by it. He had shaved. He was leaning on a cane. He had not used a cane in front of her before. He held out his free hand. She took it. He held her fingers, steady and warm, and he turned with her to face the room. "My friends," Adrian said. His voice carried farther than she had expected. It filled the hall without being raised. "This is Cassandra. She is your duchess now. She is my wife. I will not ask you to love her tonight. I will ask you to be kind to her. She has come into a house she does not yet know. She is meeting you on the same day she met me. Be patient with her. She will be patient with you." A silence. Then, from the back of the hall, an old woman's voice, dry and unimpressed. "Will she dance, your grace?" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. "That is for her to say, Mrs. Holcomb. I have not asked her. I do not, as you know, dance. You used to. I used to do many things, Mrs. Holcomb. I have given most of them up." More laughter. Cassandra felt Adrian's hand tighten very briefly on hers, and she understood that the laughter had cost him. "I will dance," she said. The room turned to her. "I will dance with anyone who asks me. I have not danced since the spring. But I will dance, Mrs. Holcomb, if it pleases you." The old woman gave a single short laugh that sounded almost like approval. "Right answer, your grace," she called. Adrian walked Cassandra to the head of the long table. The tenants took their seats. A boy of 14 with very red ears was made to say a brief grace, and then the food began to come in, and the cider and the noise rose into the high beams of the hall. Sebastian was not in the hall. She noticed it within the first minute of sitting down. His place at the head of the table was empty. Adrian's eyes flicked very briefly to the empty chair, and then to her, and he had decided not to comment on it. She decided not to comment on it either. She turned to the woman on her left, the steward's wife, and asked about the woman's children. The fiddler struck up. The benches began to clear from the lower end of the hall. Cassandra rose. Adrian rose with her, though she shook her head at him, and he sat down again, and watched her cross the floor with a young farmer who had blushed crimson when he asked her, and the young farmer trod on her foot, twice in the first figure, and apologized so profusely that she finally laughed at him. She danced 4 times. After the 4th, She came back to the head of the table flushed and a little out of breath, and as she sat, she saw at last that Sebastian had come into the hall. He was standing in the doorway by the corridor that led to the west wing. He had a glass in his hand. He still wore the dark green coat from the morning. After a moment, he raised the glass to her in a small salute and drank. "Adrian," she said quietly, "I see him. Has he been there long?" "Long enough. Ignore him for another quarter of an hour, and he will leave the doorway. And then he will do whatever he came down to do." Adrian took her hand under the table. He pressed it once and let go. "Cassandra, whatever happens this evening, do not go anywhere alone with him. Not for any reason. Not if he tells you the house is on fire. Are we agreed?" "We are agreed." "Good. Now smile at the fiddlers. They are about to start a new air, and they are nervous." She smiled at the fiddlers. The new air began, a country waltz, and the older couples rose for it. "Your Grace." The voice was at her left elbow. It was Sebastian. He had crossed the hall while she was watching the dance. He stood now beside her chair, bowing, and the bow was perfectly correct, and the smile was perfectly correct. "Mr. Quill, I was hoping for the honor of a dance, if my uncle permits." The hall had gone a fraction quieter. She looked at Adrian. The look held for the length of 2 breaths. Then Adrian inclined his head. "It is for the Duchess to permit, Sebastian. Not for me." Cassandra rose. She took Sebastian's arm because she had to, and she felt the sharp, small triumph go through him at the contact. They walked together to the open floor. He danced well. Better than the young farmer. Better than the steward. He had been to balls in London. He held her at exactly the proper distance and turned her at exactly the proper interval, and his eyes did not leave her face. "You are good at this," she said. "You are also good at this. I have not danced since the spring. You dance as if you had. Compliments to your father's dancing master. My father retained one until the spring. After the spring, he was sold along with the carriage horses. A flicker. He had not known. He had assumed her family's debt was a temporary embarrassment. Cassandra saw the flicker and stored it away. "Your Grace," he said, after the next turn. "I have something of yours." "Have you, Mr. Quill?" "I think so. It is a letter. I found it this morning in the corridor outside your bedroom door. I have been wondering how a letter addressed to you in my uncle's hand, and dated some 5 winters ago, came to be in the corridor outside your bedroom door, when by my best understanding, you were married only yesterday." She did not stumble. She turned on the Count and said very quietly, "How surprising, Mr. Quill. Please return the letter to me whenever you find it convenient." I had thought to read it first. You will find that the letter is a private matter between my husband and myself, and is therefore none of your concern. He wrote it 5 years ago, Your Grace. You were 19. You were not, I think, his wife at that time. I cannot quite reconcile the chronology. The figure of the dance brought them close. She smiled at him for the benefit of the watching room, and said, very softly, "Mr. Quill, if you read that letter, I will tell my husband what you have done. If you tell anyone else what is in that letter, I will tell my husband what you have done. If you so much as keep it in your pocket past breakfast tomorrow, I will tell my husband what you have done. Are we clear?" "And what," he said, smiling, "will my uncle do? That is not for me to predict. But given that this is the first time anyone has asked him to defend his wife in 5 years, I imagine he will find an answer quickly." The music ended. He bowed. She curtsied. He walked her, with perfect propriety, back to her chair. As she sat, Sebastian, behind her, said in a low voice meant for Adrian alone, "Charming girl, uncle. I congratulate you. Sebastian. Yes. Go to bed. Of course, Uncle. Good night, Your Grace. He left the hall. She did not turn to watch him go. She picked up her glass with a hand that was perfectly steady, and she looked at Adrian over the rim and said, almost without moving her lips, "He has one of your letters. He found it in the corridor this morning. He has not yet read it. I have told him what will happen if he does." Adrian said nothing. His face did not change. To anyone watching, he was simply listening to his wife describe her dance partner. But under the table, his hand found hers, and it closed on her hand, and it did not let go. And Cassandra felt, for the first time in her life, what it meant to be held by a man who was, in that moment, very quietly considering murder. The fiddlers struck up again. The tenants danced. The hall emptied slowly. The tenants left in pairs and family groups, with much bowing and many small, shy speeches, and Cassandra stood at the door beside Adrian and shook the hand of every one of them, and she remembered, by some small daily miracle, the names of perhaps half. The young farmer who had trodden on her foot kissed her hand on the way out, and his mother wept, and Cassandra let the woman weep, and pressed her own hand briefly between her two hands. When the last of them had gone, Adrian closed the great door himself. He leaned against it briefly. Cassandra saw what the evening had cost him. He had stood for nearly 4 hours. "Adrian." "I'm all right. You are not all right. Come and sit." He let her steer him to the chair by the fire. Mrs. Penhallow appeared with a cushion. Greaves came in behind her with a small glass of something amber. Adrian took it. "Your Grace," said Mrs. Penhallow very quietly at her elbow. Mr. Quill went directly to his rooms after he left the hall. "Halloran has been watching the corridor. He has not come out." "Thank you, Mrs. Penhallow. He had a letter on him this evening, Your Grace. Halloran could see it in the breast of his coat through the supper. It is still there." "Yes," said Cassandra. "I know." Mrs. Penhallow looked at her for a moment, the long, steady look of a woman who had served 2 duchesses and was assessing whether she would be required to bury a third. Then she nodded once, tightly, and withdrew. Cassandra sat down on the floor at Adrian's feet. There was no chair near enough, and the floor was warm with the dying heat of the fire. She sank down with her back against the side of his chair, and her knees drawn up under the silk, and she leaned her head, very lightly, against his good knee. After a long moment, she felt his hand come to rest on her hair. He did not stroke it. He simply rested his palm against the crown of her head, the way a man rests his palm against the head of a horse he is calming. "Cassandra." "Yes. Tell me what he said, word for word, and do not soften it," she told him. She told him about the letter found in the corridor, and Sebastian's tone, and the way the chronology had tripped him, and her own threats in the dance. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she had finished, he was silent for a long time. "Which letter?" he said. "He did not tell me. He said only that it was dated 5 winters ago and was in your hand." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "That would have been a bad year for me, the 5th winter after Helene. I was not always sober that winter. I do not remember every letter I wrote. I would prefer that he had not found one of those. How did it come to be in the corridor? That is what is troubling me. I keep them in the desk. The desk has been in my dressing room for 7 years. The key has been in my watch pocket for 7 years. The desk arrived in your room yesterday only because I unlocked it and brought it to you. I did not drop a letter. Then someone took it. Yes, someone in the house. Sebastian was not in the house yesterday. No." She lifted her head. He was looking at the fire. Mrs. Penhallow, Greaves, Halloran, Tilly, 2 scullery maids, the boot boy. Those are the people who were in this house yesterday morning when I unlocked the desk. None of them, to my knowledge, would do this. All of them, however, have been here long enough to have been bought. You think someone has been bought. I think someone has been waiting to be useful. Sebastian has had a great deal of time. I had thought, in my pride, that the household was loyal to me. Cassandra rose to her knees. She turned. She knelt in front of his chair, looking up at him. "Adrian," she said, "burn the rest." He looked at her. "What?" "The letters. The rest of them. The ones I have not read. Burn them. Tonight. Take them out of the desk and put them in this fire, and we will watch them burn. He cannot use what does not exist. We can take this from him in an hour." He did not answer at once. "They are yours," he said at last. "I gave them to you. I will not tell you what to do with them. If you wish to burn them, I will bring them down myself. I did not say I wished to burn them. I said you should burn them. They are yours, Cassandra. Adrian, they are yours. I gave them to you because they were always yours. I will not take them back, and I will not destroy them for you. If they are to be burned, it must be by you, and you will have to be sure. I do not think I could write them again." She stared at him. She had thought she had been offering him a kindness. She understood now that she had been offering him an erasure. He was telling her, gently, that she could burn them if she wished, and that he was not going to lift the burden of the choice from her shoulders. She lowered her head. "I am not going to burn them," she said. "No, I am going to read them." "Yes, all of them." "Yes, and tomorrow morning, Adrian, you are going to write a letter, and you are going to send it to your nephew, telling him exactly what will happen to him if he ever again touches a piece of paper that belongs to me." He looked at her. For a very long time he looked at her, Dad. Then he reached out, slowly, and he cupped her face in both his hands. "May I?" he said. "Yes." He kissed her. It was not a long kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had held himself away from a thing for a very long time, and who, having been given permission, was now trying very hard not to take more than he had been offered. The scar by his lip was a small ridge under hers. He drew back almost at once. He pressed his forehead against hers. "Cassandra." "Yes. I have wanted to do that for a long time. I will not do it again until you ask." "Adrian." "Yes. Please write the letter to your nephew before you sleep tonight." "I will. And then come up the staircase and knock on my door. You do not have to come in. I want to know that you went up the staircase, that you did not sleep in your library. I want you to sleep in your bed tonight, even if your bed is in a different room than mine." He closed his eyes. "I will knock," he said. "I will not sleep, Cassandra. I do not. Ever. But I will knock. Then that is enough for tonight." She rose. She kissed his forehead very lightly, the way a sister might kiss a brother, and she crossed the great hall, and she climbed the staircase, and she went to her room. Tilly was waiting. Tilly undressed her in silence, brushed her hair, helped her into her nightgown, banked the fire, and went out. Cassandra sat at the writing table in her white nightgown, with her hair loose down her back, and she opened the rosewood desk, and she lifted the 7 bundles out, and she counted them. The first bundle was thinner than it should have been. She counted the letters in it twice. There were 11. There should have been 12. The earliest letter, the one from 7 years ago, the very first one, the one she had not yet been able to bring herself to break the seal on, was not there. That was the letter Sebastian had. She sat very still. She understood now why he had taken that one. The earliest, the one written when she was 17 years old, the letter that would do the most damage, to her reputation, to her marriage, to Adrian's already half-drowned name in the village, and to her sister. Beatrix was 15. Beatrix would, in 3 years, be looking for a husband, and a sister married into a scandal of a duke who had written letters to her when she was 17, would be a sister who could not help her. A knock at her door. Soft. Once. Adrian. Yes. Good night, Adrian. Good night, Cassandra. A pause. Did you write the letter? It is sealed and on Greaves's salver. He will deliver it to my nephew at dawn. Thank you. His footsteps moved away. She listened until she could not hear them any longer. Then she sat at the writing table with the 11 remaining letters of 7 years ago in front of her, and she opened the second one, the one written 1 week after the first, and she read. She read until dawn. She did not read all of them. There were too many. But she read enough. She read the letters from the year she was 17, and they told her what she had needed to know. They were not the letters of a man who had improperly desired a girl of 17. They were the letters of a man keeping vigil. He had not approached her. He had not written to her family. He had only watched her and recorded what he had seen. The records were not love letters. They were a man telling himself that the world contained people and that he was permitted to notice them. That was not a scandal. That was a survival. The village would not understand the difference. But the village did not, in the end, decide her life. She did. She and Adrian did. She washed her face. She dressed. She went down to breakfast. Sebastian was not there. Adrian was. He looked exhausted. He had not slept. He rose when she came in, and she crossed to him without ceremony. Where is he? Gone. Greaves delivered the letter at dawn. Sebastian read it. He called for his horse. He left without speaking to the household. Mrs. Penhallow has searched. The letter from the desk is not in the house. Where will he take it? To London. He has friends there who edit the kind of paper that prints the kind of paper that ends marriages. He will be in London in 2 days. The paper will be in print 3 days after that. We have, perhaps, 5 days. 5 days to do what? To decide what we are going to do. No, she said. I am going to stand, and I am going to tell you what we are going to do. And you are going to listen. And then you are going to do it. He sat down. Yes. You are going to write a letter, she said. To the Times. The actual Times. You are going to tell them you wrote letters to me for 7 years and never sent one. You are going to tell them you gave them to me on our wedding night because you believed I had a right to know I had been seen for that long. You are going to tell them I have decided to remain your wife of my own choosing, and that any version of this story, which suggests otherwise, is the work of a young man who stands to lose an inheritance. He was looking at her as though she had grown a second head. You are also going to write to my father. You are going to ask him to come to Wexbourne with my sister. Sebastian's threat works only if I stand to lose something he can name. You are going to write, finally, to the rector of Larkspur Cross. You are going to ask him to read, from the pulpit, a notice of our marriage and his good wishes to us. The village whispered about Helene for 5 years because no one ever stood in the church and said anything otherwise. We are going to give them something otherwise. And then you and I are going to drive in the open carriage this afternoon through Larkspur Cross in the daylight. We are going to walk into the church together. We are going to be seen, and we will keep doing this every afternoon, for as long as it takes for the village to understand that I am not afraid of being seen with you. He finally spoke. You will be ruined, he said quietly. If I write that letter to the Times, I am putting your name in a public paper. You will not be able to retrieve yourself from it. Adrian. I am not going to have a London season. I am the Duchess of Wexbourne. I am going to have winters here, and summers here, and a sister in the East Wing, and tenants who tread on my feet, and you. I do not need London to forgive me. I need the village to see me. He stood up slowly. He came around the table and stood in front of her. "I have written letters to you for 7 years, Cassandra. I have, in not one of those letters, said anything as brave as what you just said to me before breakfast. The letters were brave, Adrian. They were brave because they were never sent. A man who writes letters he will not send is a man who is keeping the people he writes them about safe from himself. You waited until the world did the pressing. That is its own kind of bravery. Cassandra. Yes. May I? Yes." He kissed her. It was longer this time, but no less careful, and when it ended, he rested his forehead against hers, and Mrs. Penhallow, coming through the door with the Morning Post on a salver, took one look at them and turned around and went back out. He wrote the letters in the library that morning. She sat with him while he wrote. Greaves took them to the post at 1. At 4, they took the open carriage. The November afternoon was cold and very bright. Cassandra wore a dark blue cloak with a fur collar, and Adrian wore his greatcoat, and they sat together as the horses went down the long drive between the cypresses and out onto the lane that ran into Larkspur Cross. People stopped to watch them pass. Cassandra did not lower her eyes. She inclined her head to the women. She inclined her head to the men. She did not flinch. She sat with her gloved hand resting in Adrian's gloved hand, openly, for the entire length of the village high street, and she watched the village begin to bow back. They stopped at the church. The rector was at the altar, mending a kneeler. He looked up at them with the smile of a man who had received a letter that morning and had been wondering when its authors would arrive in person. "Your Grace, I have been thinking about Sunday." "As have we, Mr. Allison," Adrian said. The three of them sat in the front pew and discussed the matter for the better part of an hour. The rector had already drafted a small homily about the meaning of marriages begun in difficult seasons. When they came out of the church, the November sun was already getting low. The square was busy with women finishing their market. Cassandra glanced across the square. Standing by the door of the inn, in a clean coat and a clean hat, was Sebastian Quill. He had not gone to London. He was holding the letter in his gloved hand. He raised it to her. Slowly, deliberately. He smiled. Adrian followed her gaze. He went very still. Then, without breaking stride, the Duke of Wexbourne handed his wife into the carriage, settled himself beside her, took up the reins, and turned the carriage himself across the square toward the door of the inn. The horses crossed the cobbles. People parted. Sebastian's smile thinned. Adrian drew up 6 feet from his nephew. He did not get down. "Sebastian." "Uncle." "You have a letter." "I have. I have written this morning to the Times. The letter will be in print in 3 days. It tells the whole of the story of every letter in that desk. It includes my permission to print your name as the man who stole the only one that is missing. By the time your friends in London have set their press, mine will already be running. You may proceed if you wish, but you will be the second voice. Are we clear?" A silence. Sebastian looked at the letter. He looked at the Duke. He looked at Cassandra, who was sitting very straight, looking back at him with the steady, unfrightened attention of a woman who had decided what kind of duchess she was going to be. Then Cassandra spoke. "Give it back to me, Mr. Quill. The letter, it does not belong to you. It never did. Give it back to me." He hesitated. He looked at his uncle, then at the watching square. To tear the letter now in front of the village, after she had asked for it, would be theft and vandalism in one motion. To keep it would be to admit, openly, that he had stolen it. He stepped forward. He held the letter out to her. Cassandra leaned down from the carriage. She took the letter from his gloved hand. She held it for a moment, sealed and unbroken. She tucked it into the front of her cloak against her body. "Thank you, Mr. Quill," she said. He bowed stiffly and turned and walked back into the inn and shut the door behind him. The market women watched. Adrian turned the carriage. They drove home in silence. Halfway down the long drive, between the cypresses, Cassandra began to laugh. It was the laugh of a person who had been holding their breath for a day and a half. Adrian let her laugh, and when she had finished, he pulled the carriage up under the cypresses and turned to her. "Cassandra Quill," he said. "Yes. Will you marry me?" "Adrian, I've already married you." "Yes. Yesterday, in a chapel, because of a debt. I am asking you again now, without the chapel, without the debt, without my nephew, with nothing in this carriage but you and me and a letter we have just made him give back to us. Will you, knowing what you know, choose me?" She did not answer at once. She looked at him in the failing light, with the wind in her hair and the cold on her face, and she found that the answer had been gathering in her since the chapel, and had not finished gathering until that moment. And she said, very quietly, "Yes, Adrian, I choose you." He kissed her between the cypresses. It was the third kiss. It was not careful. The horses stood patiently in the cold, and after a long while, Adrian gathered the reins again, and they drove home to Wexbourne Hall, where the lamps had been lit in every window of the lower floor. 2 years later, the walled garden at Wexbourne was full of roses. Cassandra had planted them, with cuttings sent down from her father's garden in Wiltshire, and a few from her aunt in Salisbury, and a rare yellow rose from the rector's wife at Larkspur Cross. The fountain ran now. Beatrix, 18, and engaged to a young clergyman she had met at the church the previous autumn, was reading on the bench in the late afternoon light. The dog at her feet was an old gray lurcher named Pen. Cassandra stood at the breakfast room window watching them. Adrian came in behind her. He did not limp today. He set a cup of tea down beside her on the windowsill, and put his arms around her from behind, and rested his chin on the top of her head. "What you are thinking," he said, "that my sister is going to be married in the chapel, where you married me, and that I have been your wife for 2 years today, and I have not yet read the first of the letters." He was silent. "You have carried it home yourself, Cassandra." "I know. I have carried it for 2 years against my heart, sealed, the way I took it from him in the square. I think today is the day I open it. Why today? Because I want to know who you were when you began." He kissed her forehead. She crossed to the writing table and drew the letter from the small drawer where she had kept it, and sat down by the window in the late afternoon light, and broke the seal at last. The letter was not long. "Miss Marlowe, I do not know your name. I will learn it. There is a girl who laughed at the Cairo assembly tonight, and I have been told her name is Marlowe, and I am sitting at my writing desk in a house I have not been able to bear to live in for a year, and I am writing to her because I do not know what else to do with the fact that I have, this evening, for the first time since I lost my wife, remembered that the world isn't over. I am not going to send this. I don't know you. You owe me nothing. I am 33 years old, and you are perhaps 18, and I am a widower with a damaged leg and a damaged name and a great deal of grief, and you laughed across a ballroom at someone else, and you did not see me, and I am going to keep it that way. I want, however, to write this down, so that if I am ever a different man than the one I am tonight, I will remember the night that the change began. It began, Miss Marlowe, with you. You did not know you were doing it. Yours, although not in any way you will ever be required to know. Cassandra read it. She read it again. She folded it. Adrian, you did not burn the drawer. No. You wrote me 167 letters instead, and you became a different man, and you gave me the desk on our wedding night. And the key. Yes, you are not the man who wrote that letter, and I am not the girl he wrote it to. No, Then we are, after all, two people who chose each other. Yes. I had thought on our wedding day that we were two people who had not been allowed a choice. I no longer think that. We were always choosing. I was choosing when I came down the staircase in the chapel. You were choosing when you brought the desk yourself rather than send it. We were choosing every morning, Adrian, and we go on choosing every morning. That is what a marriage is. Not a thing that happens to two people. A thing two people decide to do every morning, on purpose. Adrian came across the room to her. He took her face in both his hands. He pressed his forehead to hers, the way he had at the breakfast table 2 years before, and the way he had between the cypresses, and the way he would, every important morning of his life. I choose you, Cassandra. I choose you, Adrian. In the garden below, Beatrix laughed at something the dog had done, and the late November sun came briefly out of the cloud and touched the last yellow rose on the south wall, the one that had been blooming there the day Cassandra had first arrived, and was blooming there still. Thank you for staying with Cassandra and Adrian to the end. If their story moved you, please subscribe for more stories like this one. There are more letters in the desk. There are more roses on the wall. Good night from Wexbourne Hall.